Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I was 7 years old when this happened, and it's still one of those memories that makes my blood boil whenever I think about it. Ever since I was little, I've been dealing with strep throat. It wasn't just your regular sore throat. For me, it came with a nasty twist. If I ate anything other than very specific foods, I'd throw up without fail. My parents learned this the hard way after several miserable episodes. My mom was a nurse at the local hospital, and my dad worked long hours at his construction company. They were amazing parents who always made sure I was well taken care of, especially during my frequent bouts with strep throat. They had a regular babysitter who understood my condition perfectly, but she had to quit suddenly when her husband got transferred to another state. That's how we ended up with this new babysitter. She was in her 50s, came with decades of experience according to the agency, and had glowing recommendations. I'm pretty sure those recommendations were as fake as her honey-sweet attitude during the interview with my parents. The first few days were okay because I was healthy. But then strep throat hit me again. The doctor confirmed it with a test, prescribed antibiotics, and gave the usual instructions about sticking to soft, easy-to-swallow foods. That morning, my mom prepared everything I would need: chicken broth in a thermos to keep it warm, chamomile tea, and some throat-soothing honey. She explained everything to the babysitter in detail. I told her I wasn't feeling very good that day. She dismissed me, saying that I was being dramatic and that a little sore throat never killed anyone. When I tried to mention what my mom had said, she cut me off, telling me that my mother was spoiling me and that when she raised her kids, they didn't coddle them over every little thing. Around lunchtime, she went to the kitchen and came back with a turkey sandwich. The smell alone made my stomach turn. She told me to eat up. I tried explaining that I couldn't eat that because I'd get sick, and reminded her that my mom had left chicken broth for me. She wouldn't listen, insisting that it was perfectly good food and that she wouldn't have me wasting it. She added that my mother needed to stop babying me. I tried to refuse, but she wasn't having it. She grabbed my chin, forced my mouth open, and started shoving pieces of the sandwich in. I tried begging her to stop, but she kept going. I was crying and trying to push her hands away, but she was much stronger than me. She kept telling me to stop fighting and insisted this was for my own good. 2 minutes later, exactly what I knew would happen, happened. Everything came right back up, all over her fancy blouse and skirt. She jumped back, screaming like she'd been set on fire. She started yelling at me, calling me a disgusting little brat, and accusing me of doing it on purpose. She grabbed her phone and called my mom at work. She angrily told my mom that I had deliberately vomited all over her and that she'd never seen such horrible behavior in all her years of child care. She demanded that my mom come home and deal with this right now. My mom arrived 20 minutes later, and I'd never seen her so angry. Her face was red, and her hands were shaking as she confronted the babysitter. She was furious, demanding to know how the babysitter could force-feed her sick child after being specifically told about his condition and having appropriate food left. The babysitter tried defending herself, claiming I was just spoiled and all I needed was a firm hand. My mom exploded, shouting that force-feeding a sick child was abuse. The babysitter tried to argue, but my mom wasn't having any of it. She gathered my things, helped me to the car, and made sure I was okay. But before we left, she turned to the babysitter one last time and warned her that she'd be hearing from Child Protective Services and that she would make sure every child care agency in the city knew what she did. What I didn't know then was that my mom had already called Child Protective Services before she left the hospital. She also called the agency that sent the babysitter and filed a formal complaint. The investigation revealed that she had actually been fired from 2 previous child care centers for similar behavior, but had managed to hide it by using fake references. She lost her childcare license and was banned from working with children again. The agency that placed her was also investigated and fined for not properly vetting their caregivers. I still got strep throat several more times growing up, but at least I never had to deal with that babysitter again. My parents found a wonderful new babysitter who actually listened and cared, and who understood that when a child says they'll get sick from certain foods, they mean it. I've been into aerial photography for about 3 years now. Started as a hobby during the pandemic when I couldn't really go anywhere, and it turned into a small side business. I do real estate shots, event coverage, and sometimes just artistic stuff for my portfolio. I've got all the proper licenses and permits, did the whole Federal Aviation Administration certification process and everything. My apartment complex has this amazing rooftop access. When I first moved in 6 months ago, I specifically asked the property manager if I could use it for my drone flights. They were cool with it as long as I showed them my licenses and insurance, which I did. I've been up there dozens of times without any issues. So last Saturday, I had this real estate gig lined up for the afternoon. I wanted to test some new camera settings beforehand, so I headed up to the roof around 10 a.m. It was a perfect morning, clear skies, minimal wind, ideal conditions for flying. I was about 15 minutes into my flight when I heard the roof access door slam open. This woman comes storming out, phone already pressed to her ear. She was frantically calling the police, screaming that there was a sniper on her building's roof and that I was going to kill her. I tried to explain that I was just flying my drone, but she told me to shut up and not move. She kept yelling into her phone that I had some kind of weapon. I attempted to reason with her, explaining that what she saw was just a drone controller and pointing out the drone in the sky. She accused me of lying, claiming she had seen me pointing something at her window from the 8th floor. When I told her that was impossible since I had been focusing on the building across the street for a real estate shoot, she just screamed into her phone that I was threatening her now. Within minutes, I could hear sirens. A lot of sirens. The woman was blocking the roof access door, so I just stayed put, kept my hands visible, and waited. Soon enough, 4 police officers burst through the door with their weapons drawn. The first officer ordered me to put my hands up and drop the device slowly. I complied immediately and explained that it was just a drone controller, pointing out my drone still in the air. I told them I had all my licenses and permits in my bag. The woman kept insisting that I had been aiming at her window and demanding they arrest me. One of the officers had to tell her to step back and let them handle the situation. They quickly verified my story. I showed them my Federal Aviation Administration license, my insurance, the property manager's written permission, everything. One officer even asked to see my drone's flight log, which clearly showed I hadn't gone anywhere near the woman's side of the building. The woman became even more agitated, insisting she knew what she saw and calling the officers incompetent. She demanded to speak to their supervisor. When the officers told her to calm down and explained that I had proper documentation and there was no sniper threat, she became even more confrontational. She kept demanding to know what I had been pointing at her window, refusing to accept that she might be wrong. The first officer told her that the flight log proved my drone wasn't near her window and warned her about the seriousness of making false reports to the police. That's when she completely lost it, demanding my immediate arrest. She then tried to grab one officer's arm while screaming for a supervisor, which proved to be her final mistake. The second officer told her she was under arrest for filing a false police report, disturbing the peace, and assaulting a police officer. She completely lost it then, screaming about being the victim and claiming police brutality while they put her in handcuffs. The whole time she was threatening to have their badges taken away. Later that day, the property manager came to see me. Apparently, this woman had been causing problems ever since she moved in 2 months ago. She'd filed countless complaints about her neighbors for ridiculous things like breathing too loudly and walking suspiciously. The property manager apologized for the incident and told me they were already starting the eviction process based on multiple lease violations. I still fly my drone from the roof, but now I record a video of the entire session, just in case. The woman ended up getting charged with multiple offenses, including filing false reports and assaulting an officer. She is now facing some serious fines and possible jail time, plus she's been evicted. The other residents organized a little rooftop party the day she moved out. Guess who they hired to take aerial photos of the celebration? I've been spending the last 3 months taking my mother to her cancer treatments. Every Tuesday and Thursday, like clockwork, we'd make the hour-long drive to the hospital. The treatments were tough on her, but she remained positive, even cracking jokes with the nurses. I wish I had half her strength. That one morning had been rough. Mom had a bad reaction to her latest treatment, and we spent most of the night in the emergency room. After finally getting home at 4 a.m., I managed just 2 hours of sleep before having to deal with my peeling license plate. The provincial service office opened at 9 a.m., and I knew from experience that getting there early was crucial. The office was exactly as I expected. Fluorescent lights, plastic chairs, and about 20 people already in line. I took my place, grateful that at least the line usually moved quickly. My plan was simple: get the plate fixed and head home for a much-needed nap before picking up Mom's new prescriptions. That's when she walked in. She was probably in her mid-50s, wearing an expensive-looking coat and carrying an expensive handbag that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Instead of joining the line like everyone else, she just leaned against a rope barrier and started loudly demanding information about getting a birth certificate. The service agent at the desk looked up from helping another customer. I could see the resignation on his face. He'd probably dealt with people like her before. When he told her she needed to join the line for assistance, she insisted she just had a few quick questions that wouldn't take long. And somehow, instead of directing her to the line again, the agent actually stopped serving people to answer her questions. The rest of us stood there watching as she monopolized his time with question after question. 5 minutes turned into 10. Someone behind me complained under their breath about how unbelievable the situation was. I couldn't have agreed more. Finally, she seemed satisfied and turned to leave. The line started moving again, and I felt my tension beginning to ease. But then, just as she reached the entrance, she spun around dramatically. She announced that she'd forgotten to get her parking validated. She walked right back to the rope barrier, completely bypassing the line again. That's when something in me snapped. Maybe it was the exhaustion, maybe it was thinking about my mom's quiet dignity through all her treatments, or maybe I was just fed up with entitled behavior. In a gentle voice, I spoke up and told her she would need to wait in line like everyone else. She looked at me as if I'd just suggested she should eat off the floor. She responded by saying she was on a time crunch and only had a quick question. I explained to her that this was the reception line and we all had quick questions, so she had to wait. Her face turned red and she clutched her bag tighter. Then she started repeatedly saying Happy New Year with increasing sarcasm, as if passive-aggressively wishing someone a Happy New Year somehow made her behavior acceptable. Then something unexpected happened. An elderly gentleman near the front of the line spoke up, commenting that common courtesy would make it a Happy New Year. A woman in a nurse's uniform joined in, pointing out that some people had been there since the office opened and everyone was on a time crunch. The entitled woman looked around, probably expecting someone to defend her, but was met with stern faces and crossed arms. Red-faced, she stormed to the back of the line, muttering about people these days and no respect. Here she was, probably the same age as those who constantly complain about entitled younger generations, displaying exactly the kind of behavior she likely criticizes in others. When she finally reached the front of the line 20 minutes later, I noticed the service agent was taking his time with her parking validation, methodically checking every detail of her ticket. The small smile on his face told me it was completely intentional. When I finally got my turn and explained about my peeling license plate, the agent thanked me for speaking up earlier, noting that some people need to be reminded that rules apply to everyone. And I got my new plate that day. Living with dwarfism has its challenges, but I've learned to adapt and ask for help when needed. At 4'2", I've developed various strategies to navigate a world built for taller people. Usually I manage just fine with tools like grabber sticks and step stools, but sometimes I need to rely on the kindness of strangers. Last week I had to make an emergency grocery run because my sister and her kids were coming over for dinner. I promised to make her famous comfort food, macaroni and cheese with a special blend of cheeses. The problem was I'd run out of the crucial ingredient, sharp cheddar cheese. The local supermarket had recently reorganized their shelves, making everything higher than before. Usually I shop at a smaller store where I know all the staff, and they're always happy to help. But this time, I was in a hurry and the supermarket was closer. I've been staring at the top shelf for a few minutes, trying to figure out how to reach the specific cheese I needed, when I noticed a tall teenager nearby. He was probably around 6 feet tall, wearing headphones and browsing through the dairy section. I politely asked him if he could help me reach something from the top shelf. The teenager looked startled and immediately told me he didn't work there. I explained that I knew that, but since he was taller than me, I was hoping he could help me get something down. He made an understanding sound and his face flushed with embarrassment as he realized his mistake. He quickly moved to help me, but before he could reach for the cheese, we heard a shrill voice behind us. A middle-aged woman with the classic, "Can I speak to your manager" haircut came storming toward us. She demanded to know what we were doing, complaining that she had been waiting for assistance for 10 minutes and was angry that he was helping me instead of her. The teenager, looking confused and uncomfortable, tried to explain that he didn't work there and was just helping out. The woman accused him of lying, saying she had seen him helping me, and insisted that if he could help me, he could help her too. I jumped in to defend him, explaining again that he wasn't an employee and that I had just asked for his help because I couldn't reach the top shelf. The woman accused us of being in cahoots and threatened to report us both to the manager for discrimination. At this point, an actual store employee who had heard the commotion came over and asked if there was a problem. The woman immediately complained about the teenager, claiming he was an employee who refused to help her and was pretending not to work there. The employee looked at the teenager, who was clearly a customer, and explained to the woman that he was indeed not an employee, pointing out that their staff members wear dark blue vests with name tags. The employee then offered to help her instead. The woman's face turned red, but instead of apologizing, she argued that he shouldn't be helping random people if he's not an employee because it was misleading. I questioned her logic, asking if she really thought people shouldn't help others unless they're being paid for it. Several customers who had gathered around began chuckling at my comment. The teenager, who had been quiet throughout this exchange, finally spoke up. He announced that he would help me get my cheese and then help anyone else who needed something from a high shelf, because that's what decent people do. True to his word, he reached up and grabbed the sharp cheddar I needed, handed it to me, and then asked the gathered crowd if anyone else needed the help reaching anything. 2 elderly customers actually took him up on his offer, much to the woman's visible frustration. She stormed off toward the customer service desk, but the employee followed her, presumably to head off any false complaints. I apologized to the teenager for getting him caught up in all the drama, but he assured me it was no problem. He added that I was right. He should get used to helping, saying that being tall was probably the easiest superpower to share with others. We shared a laugh, and I headed to check out with my cheese. When I was leaving, I saw the teenager still helping other customers reach items, while the angry woman was having an animated conversation with a manager who looked thoroughly unimpressed with her complaints. The macaroni and cheese turned out perfect that night, and my sister's kids loved it. But more than that, I was reminded that for every entitled person in the world, there are many more who are willing to help others just because they can. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.